I'm Austinlugo.
I'm Andrew Harp,
This is With Nothing to Say.
and let's talk about possession.
You suggested this movie, Andrew, because we had
Yeah,
just auditioned. I had heard a lot about this movie before we watched it. I'd seen a lot of stuff on like Letterboxd and IMDb. I've seen a lot of people talk about it before. It's a pretty famous horror film. And so going into it, I had sort of certain expectations. How would you describe the plot of this movie?
it's a movie about a couple that doesn't understand each other, and slowly over the course of the movie, crazy, unexplainable things happen. Is the best way to describe it without really like going to being too specific.
It's a confusing film in a
Yeah.
in a very different way than Audition is. I think like Audition is very say like it's confusing, but it's like it knows very much like what the confusing parts are, and it's very detailed. And this isn't off the walls like say House is, but I think it definitely leans more towards that end of the spectrum than it does say. Like I don't think it's as clean cut. Like there's a lot of kind of missing parts that the director here just isn't interested in telling us about. They just kind of left just to their own accord, I guess.
Yeah, I would agree with you for sure. Possession, yeah, you compared it to Audition, which is, I would say, a pretty good movie to compare it to. There are some similarities. One thing about them is that they're both very classy horror films. They're sort of very classy. But there are a lot of other movies that I thought of when I watched this, not in a bad way, in a good way, because Possession came out in 1981, which feels pretty early. So there's a couple other movies I'm sure we will mention and discuss that kind of reminded me of this movie a little bit. It's directed by Ukrainian-born Polish director Andrzej Zulawski. Zulawski.
Pulaski.
It's a Polish name. I'm sorry, I cannot pronounce it. Very specific. Zulawski directed movies all of his life. Died in 2016. Art house movies. This is the only movie I've seen by him. I don't know if it's the same thing for you. Yeah, which I'll watch his other movies. There seem to be other movies he's made that are also very good. So I'll watch those too sometime. And this is his only English language film.
Really?
Yeah.
So when the film opens up, it's like kind of the opening scene is just like your basic kind of establishing shots, but they're kind of like a little creepy in the establishing shots. There's like a shot of like I think there's like a railroad crossing, but it looks like a cross. There's a lot of Christian symbolism throughout the film, and so the beginning's kind of just that. This film actually reminds me in a lot of ways of The Exorcist, just to kind of the style of filmmaking, not so much in like the story itself, but kind of the style of filmmaking it is.
The way it looks, yeah.
Yeah, the way it looks, for sure.
Definitely. And it's also, possession.
Right. Kind of similar
Thing.
thing. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so then we open up on our male protagonist. I don't know if it's protagonist.
Mark. Sam Neill.
Yes, the one and only. Who?
He's good.
Incredible.
Actor. Most people know Sam Neill, of course, from his performance in Jurassic Park, which is a great performance. I'm a Jurassic Park fan. But the thing about Sam Neill is that before Jurassic Park, and I know other movies that he's been in, he's just like an off-the-wall character. But we'll talk about that.
Yeah, it's incredible performance. Incredible performances all around, honestly.
Yeah, just all around, yeah. But yeah, we'll get into that. Yeah, of course.
But Sam Neill is in a taxi. He's like raiding some stuff. Nothing really exciting goes on. He gets back to his house, and in front of the apartment complex, and it's like a super wide. It's almost like a fisheye lens, which they use a lot of in this film. There's a lot of like super wide angles, which kind of creates this sort of distorted feel, especially on the ends. It almost like curves at the ends of the screen, and it's a conversation between him and his wife, and I would say this is true for a lot of the movie. It's pretty confusing. Like it's like very realistic in the sense of like there's a certain backstory that both these characters have that they don't really give the audience. So it's like the middle of a conversation at all. Yeah, at any point. So it's like almost the middle of a conversation. It's off-putting, not in like a bad way, like it's like bad filmmaking, but off-putting. Like it feels weird. It feels off. It feels wrong. And they're having this argument because she feels like he's never there with him. Like he's kind of like off in his own little world.
And just to, of course, mention as well, it takes place in West Berlin, 1981 West Berlin, which is a big part of the movie, of course. It's basically part of the whole thing. And Mark, I think, is a spy. He just got back from an espionage mission. So he's like a spy guy. And like you said, they kind of talk outside the apartments. And then I think they go into the apartment and, you know, he's back and stuff. And things get a little bit more intense. The first act is very emotionally intense.
It reminds me a bit of, there's this Ingmar Bergman series, Scenes from a Marriage, which almost takes place entirely in like a single like apartment. It has some of those feels to it and the sort of blocking. And that's another really interesting and weird part about this film is there's a lot of movement going on. Like from the camera, it's a lot of moving. And at times it feels like there'll be shots that are like, you know, still shots that are just absolutely beautiful and like perfectly framed. And other times it'll just be like moving a lot and it feels almost directionless, if I could say that. And like its movement.
There's the one scene where he's talking to his bosses and he's like sitting down and it's a giant room. They're like really big rooms in the movie, which I love. And the camera is just going, it's going like all the way around the room, just circling them. I think it does like once or twice. And, you know, like you said, yeah, it's just like, it's not moving, I would say, erratically. It's moving broadly, kind of quickly, a little bit quickly, into like, you know, like, it's more like, you know, just a big swooping motion around everyone. And that's another part that I loved about the movie was, of course, just like the directing style in general. It's very classy. It's purposeful. You know, when something's a wide shot, it's great. When something's a close, it looks great. It's like, yes, like that close up, great, perfect. When something's wide, it's like, yes, like there's a, like, you know what I mean?
There's something almost deceivingly simple in the way it's sort of shot. You could almost see like a student filmmaker attempting to make something like this in the way that there's no like super complicated like movements or sort of editing. Of course, the framing's absolutely beautiful and the blocking is great, but it's very simple. And I think in a lot of ways, making a film simple is a lot harder because it's much easier to see a flaw in something simple than say, you know, if you have this really like cool crane movement, you don't really see as much. But this one, I think he took a big risk. And after he has that discussion where he's in the like office and the camera's kind of going around, there's also this mention when he's in the office, which is a little bit important later, is it's very unclear of what exactly it is. They're very vague about what his job is. No one really says what he does. So like, you know, you kind of have to assume that he works for like some secret agency or like a spy or something like that. There's never...
I think he's definitely a spy.
Yeah. I mean,
but I don't know what he does.
Yeah, he did. It's very unclear. And, you know, they talk about the subject wearing pink socks, which comes into play towards the end of the film. But you're like, you don't know who the subject is. You don't know who any of these people are. It's just weird and odd. So it's just a very weird setup. But they basically tell him that, hey, we want you to continue working for us. And he's like, no, I'm done. You said like this would be it. And, you know, he wants to spend more time with his family. He hasn't been around for a long time. And they're like, well, you know, we'll give you a bunch more money. He's like, I don't need any more money. So he basically like pushes them off and he goes back home.
And then, you know, pretty much, you know, like you said, that scene's kind of like cut out, but, you know, Mark and Anna are basically having arguments about getting a divorce. And Mark is like, is it someone else? You know, why do you want a divorce? And, you know, she's like, no, it's not, you know, or, you know, are you seeing someone? No, I'm not. I think they like kind of go to bed or something like that. And I think he looks through some books while Anna's gone. And Anna's been doing this thing where she kind of disappears a little bit. And he looks through some books and he's able, I don't know why he does this. He's able to find like a postcard of the Taj Mahal, I think. And I think it's something along the lines of like, it was to Anna from Heinrich. And it says like, I've seen half of the face of God here and the other half is you, or something like that. It's like a love note or something to her. And that basically gives him the indication that, you know, she was lying. She's seeing someone named Heinrich. And so they go to a cafe. Like he calls her up and like, hey, we got to meet at the fucking cafe. Like, okay. They go there. That scene is so good. They do the thing where like, so it's like a booth, but they don't sit in front of each other. They sit like, I guess you could say perpendicular to each other.
And there's a mirror behind them too. So it's like all reflected. It's so strange.
Funny too, though, you can barely see the reflection behind them.
Yeah.
I think it's just because of how it's angled. And Mark is just like, I don't care. You can take the kid and you can take the apartment. Yeah, I don't care. And she's like, come on, like I still want the apartment, or whatever. And they have a big fight at the cafe. And Neo loses his mind. He's throwing stuff around like he's insane. He's like throwing chairs and stuff everywhere, and they're all screaming and stuff. There's a lot of screaming in the movie. And then Mark, I think right after that, Mark is all of a sudden wakes up in an apartment and turns out he's been binge drinking for 3 weeks in like a hotel room.
And this is one of my favorite moments in styles of in editing in this whole film. It's just wonderful because it's like this really crazy, he's throwing chairs around, he's yelling, he's screaming. She's like, backing up. There's like people, which it's a little funny because like there's no one in the diner. And for a while, like no one does anything. They're just kind of like, whatever. But then obviously, eventually, people come and they try to stop him and all that. And then it just like does a real hard cut. And it's him sitting on a bed. The lighting is kind of grimy and dark, and he looks super disheveled. And like the first thing out of his mouth is like, how long has it been?
Yeah.
And a woman, I can't remember who the woman is.
It's like a maid there. He was just
a maid. Yeah. It says like, it's been 3 weeks. You experience, right, his binge drinking. You kind of experience his sort of blackout that he went through. Because at one point you're here, at the next point it's been 3 weeks later. So he's like, he's freaking out. So he goes back to their apartment where he finds their kid alone, which the kid's only, was he like 6, 5, 6-ish?
Like a little kid.
Like a little kid. Certainly not old enough to be on his own.
Yeah, really, no.
And, he asks where his mom's been, and he's like, oh, he hasn't been here. And he's got like chocolate all over his face, and he's been all this, and he's playing with this bow. And he's like, where did you get that bow? And he's like, oh, Heinrich, right? Heinrich?
He says Uncle Heinrich gave it to me.
Uncle Heinrich gave it to me.
He's like, oh, wow, okay. It's like the son's like covered in jam and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you read, this is like a breakup movie kind of thing where the director used to be married to an actress named Mal Grzada Branek. Once again, another Polish name. And it says here in Wikipedia, actually, they had, I guess, a really tough divorce. Kind of like the David Cronenberg, The Brood thing, where Cronenberg made The Brood right after he had a really bad divorce, like a very emotionally, difficult divorce. And it says here on Wikipedia, so he said, Zulawski recalled how he once returned home late in the evening and found his 5-year-old son Xavier alone in the apartment smeared with jam after his wife left him alone for several hours. So yeah, it's definitely it seems like you directly took that scene from his into the movie. It's like, yeah, he's like covered in shit.
It's a pretty disturbing moment. It just feels like, and you kind of feel his sort of emotions, but I don't find any of the characters to be even Sam Neill's character, they're not characters that really give off a lot of empathy, or you know what I mean? They're not really characters that they have a lot of good qualities to. Like, they're not really good people.
The only character I feel bad for is the kid.
Yep. Yeah, everyone else is kind of awful in this. Like, they're not good people. Like, I get that like Sam Neill's going through, his thing.
They're all very messed up people. It's very, very interesting. There's a couple all the main characters I would say are very, hard to sympathize with. But I see what you mean. But Anna gets back to the apartment.
Mm-hmm.
She's like, yeah, I know. I was gone for a long time. And he's now kind of like changed his mind. It seems like now he's kind of like, Bob needs actually to be taken care of. So he kind of is now back at the apartment after binge drinking, and now he's like pretty much here to stay. So like I said, in the first act, Sam Neill and of course the actress I have to see right here, Isabel Adjani, they fight a lot in the first act, I would say, and it's just like a couple fights after another that are very emotionally exhausting, very tough to swallow, I guess you could say, where it might be difficult for certain people to watch. It's very, they're very physical and very shouty. Everyone, like in their faces and in their demeanor and in their body language, are very angry and very depressed. So it's those scenes are very hard to watch, but they are good, because they're just that. I guess they're very believable in a way. But just to finish up, Anna stays, he gets she back fast, she stays, and then she leaves in the middle of the night.
And that's when she leaves a letter, right, that she's going over to her friend Margie, which we've established earlier in the film that Margie's kind of like, seems to be basically her only friend. It's someone, yep. And Sam Neill and or Mark and Margie are not, they don't really like each other.
They're curt with each other on the phone.
So he's suspicious because he already knows about Heinrich. So he's like, well, is she really going over to Margie? So he calls Margie up, and of course Margie says, no, she's not here. So he's like, getting pissed. He's like, hey, I know she's with someone else. Who is he? Tell me everything you know.
Beans, yeah.
Yeah. And after a little, back and forth, she ends up giving him his address. Is that what she does?
He first gets a call from Heinrich, remember? Heinrich calls him, and she's like, Anna's here. So yeah, he gets the address somehow, I think. I want to say from Margie, but I don't know. Actually, he finds the phone number.
In the phone book, right?
Yeah, the phone book. He gets a phone number, and I think he calls the establishment, and he gets on the phone with Heinrich's mom.
Yeah.
And she's like, oh, I miss Anna. She's never over here anymore, or something like that. The next day, though, Mark takes his son to school.
And so apparently he's never taken his son to school before, but he takes it
wrong.
Yeah, well, I guess. So he takes his son to school for apparently the first time ever, and he meets the teacher, or
Helen.
Helen, the teacher, and she looks very similar. She has like certain features that are very similar to his wife, and she has these like, I don't know if they're using like contacts, but like her eyes, like it's like the greenness of her eyes. There's almost like a cat-like quality to them. I found them a bit strange and a little weird. And one of the first things he says to her is like, "Is that a wig that she's wearing?" Which is kind of a weird first question. I didn't really.
She looks identical to his wife, except that she has red hair and green eyes, and she also wears white the entire movie. Like Helen wears white like the whole time, while Anna wears basically the same dark blue dress the whole time, the whole movie.
Yeah, Helen's just supposed to be like this, sweet, innocent, just kind of perfect preschool, elementary school teacher, and they have like a little conversation, and it's clear that from this one conversation that Mark kind of is into Helen.
Yeah, mysteriously looks like Anna. All right, well, then he visits Heinrich, one of the greatest characters in film of all time. Another great performance. Like you said, everyone's good in it, and he is very good in it. Just so good. And like the whole conversation is great. He goes in the door, and he's like, "Is Anna here?" Because Anna's been gone for a little while, and Heinrich's like, "She's not here. Like she hasn't been here for like a while." And he's like, "I'm gonna break the door down." He's like, "The door's open. You can come in." He goes in there, and Heinrich is great. He's got like a shirt. He's like kind of like an old middle-aged, kind of sweaty, I guess, German or Russian guy or something like that. And his like shirt is buttoned down halfway. He's buff, like not really buff, but he's a middle-aged guy. And he lives with his mom in this apartment. I like when they walk around the apartment because the apartment's really cool.
Yeah.
He's got like, weird paintings and like tons of books everywhere. So, like, the rooms are weird looking.
He's basically everything that Mark is not. Like he's this, really rich, successful, very like calm, cool, collected, like peace and love, and just hilariously.
I guess.
Yeah, in a very German way, and he's not like angry at all. I guess not really sure how. He's not like angry or scared with Mark. He thinks like love. He's like yeah. He's like, oh yeah, he's like all about free love. Well, hypothetically, he's all about free love, and Mark tries to fight him, and
he gets his ass kicked. He gets beaten up. Yeah, Mark eventually just gets mad at Heinrich, and Heinrich he fights with his wife, but Heinrich destroys Mark. He beats him up, kicks him in the face, and then he leaves and goes home.
It's also interesting even like the way they fight. It's very, because Mark is this very sort of masculine, in this traditional sort of masculine way where it's always very aggressive and very kind of head first. Where Heinrich's kind of the opposite, right? He's someone like through most of the fight he doesn't actually he doesn't throw a lot of punches. It's a lot of like dodging and kind of moving back, and kind of maneuvering. It's very Taoist, or like sort of like jujitsu, where you're using like the other person's right leverage to yourself. And that kind of shows their dynamic at the beginning through that fight, is where they are at the beginning. Of course, later in the film that changes a bit, but at this point Heinrich just seems this loving, cool kind of, and at this point in the film, I love Heinrich. I mean, I still love him, but like he's at this point in the film, he's the most likable character, other than the
You
kid.
don't see characters like these in movies, I feel like, nowadays. It's like, it's just, he's so unusual. It's like, I don't know like who I would compare a character like that to, in any other movie I've seen, so it's like, I don't know.
It almost has like a sitcom quality to it, like he's kind of like but in a way that like I think in a sitcom would sort of fail, because they'd use it only as a joke, where I think in this there's this certain realness to it. Like, yeah, he's a little ridiculous and odd, but it doesn't feel fake in the way in like in a sitcom he would just be like someone to kind of laugh at, where this it feels more three-dimensional in a certain sense.
The next fight that they have is very difficult, where they basically slap each other in the face, and they're just like fighting about Heinrich and stuff like that. And I think she flees.
Yes.
I don't remember if it's the next fight or that fight, but Hannah like is running through the city, like she's able to like run out of the building.
It's this fight, yeah.
Yeah, and she is like being chased by Mark. You talked about a little how in the cafe there's no people. Like in the movie, there's like no people like overall. Like there's like very little people in the streets. I'm guessing that's how West Berlin was. I'm getting like, that whole area, by the way, like the buildings and the architecture of the buildings and the way that the streets and city looks, very like, I don't think I've ever seen a movie really that actually took place in Berlin, like that actually was filmed in Berlin. So it's kind of interesting to see the city in that light, because it's just so lonely and depressing and empty. Yeah. And West Berlin's supposed to be like the good side, you know what I mean? Right. Like the desirable side, but it looks so like, I don't know, it just looks awful. Like the buildings are really cool, like the architecture is cool, but even like the architecture of the buildings exude a kind of like loneliness to it. So yeah, when they're like when Mark is chasing Anna down the street, it's just like, there's just like no one there. And then something happens and Anna basically jumps in front of a truck. She doesn't get hit, but like some smashed cars on the truck like fall off. Yeah. And then for some reason after that, her like demeanor or expression changes, almost as if she's like possessed, and she runs away. And then Mark is like, okay, whatever. And then there's the second fight the next day, I believe. Another amazing scene.
Yeah, it's so intense because they're like going back and forth, and this fight, kind of like that, they definitely use the space of the apartment, even though it's like it feels very claustrophobic. And although I would say a lot of the film feels very claustrophobic, but especially when they're in the apartment, like the walls just feel like very close, and it's very opposite from some of the films, especially like Umbrellas of Cherbourg. I was actually kind of thinking of that film because, like, how all those films, like all the rooms will be like, oh, this one's orange, like this one's blue. Where in this film, like almost all the walls are white. Like it is so bare.
That's another thing too about the depressing quality of the city. Like there's no color, very beigey, gray, black kind of colors. Nothing is really all that, colored.
And so they're having this fight, and they go into the kitchen, and she starts cutting first she's putting meat into a meat grinder, right?
She's using the electric knife to cut meat and then putting it in a meat grinder.
And it's like gross and disturbing, and she's like carrying raw meat, and of course there's kind of images of human flesh, and just kind of, and it's kind of weird, like she's like having this fight while cutting this meat.
Yeah, they're arguing, they're screaming at each other,
and it's just brutal.
It's awful.
And then at some point she just stops, and she holds the electric knife to her throat.
Yeah, she hits her neck.
Yeah.
And basically grazes her neck.
And he like grabs her, and she runs off into a different room.
He gets a bandage around her neck. So yeah, he gets into in the bathroom, puts like a bandage around her neck, so she has like this almost like necklace kind of thing around her neck.
Like a scarf almost, yeah.
Yep. And then Mark, for some reason, I think just because he's so like emotionally destroyed by having to argue all the time, he cuts his arm.
That scene is really strange because it's like almost in calmness. Like he makes like 3 separate cuts, and it's not like they're just like And he doesn't like show much emotion or like any sort of pain when he does it either. It's just like, oh, I guess almost possessed in a certain sense where he just like does it. It's weird. And I'm not entirely sure what to make of that moment in the film.
He's just upset. I guess that's what it means. It just means that like she's upset, he's upset. This is to the point of how upset they are about just having to do this whole thing.
There's a certain calmness that comes when he's doing that, because before, like, it's pretty brutal, and like when she holds it to her neck, but then when he does it, like the fight's kind of ended, and and she's like there in the background, right? She like watches him do it. It's so strange.
But great scene. Like I don't care. Like it looks real when he does the
Very
thing.
real.
It looks very real. Yeah, great effects, great, blood and gore or whatever. But it's not really like a blood. When I say blood and gore, I don't mean like like a Frank Henenlotter movie or like a Friday the 13th movie. It feels a little bit more weighty.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like there's more stakes involved. So, but it all looks still really real. So it kind of combines to make something that feels very genuine and very real. But I think then after that, Mark more or less decides to hire a private investigator. When you really think about what happens in the movie from just like a structural point of view, it's just insane. Well, maybe not a structural point of view, but just like all the things that happen, you know what I mean? Like the occurrences, like, the fights, like the people who end up getting killed, like just like everything involved, like so many things happen in the movie so quickly. And like as it gets more and more towards the end, it's just like pandemonium how much stuff happens.
And I think something that's really interesting is even though there's so much stuff packed into it, it doesn't feel rushed in a way. Like it feels paced really well throughout the whole film. Like it never feels like a million things are happening at once. It feels very well paced and like everything kind of had its own thing. So he goes and hires this private investigator, which I think is just the worst private. Like I think he's terrible at his job.
Yeah, well, Mark is just like he's like crazy. He's like just follow Anna around is pretty much what he wants.
And so our private investigator goes and follows Anna around at just like the close, like
that scene is so fucking funny, dude. It's
so
like
funny.
He's just kind of the investigator, the detective is walking around, and it's just the two of them. Once again, there's no one there, so it's obvious that he's following her. We don't really have like cell phones. I guess no one owns a car. It's just like that's really the only way, I guess.
And he's like following her around. He's pretty close to her too. And whenever like she turns around, he'll like pretend to do something, but he's not very good at it. Like it's just, and then she starts to, of course, figure out that he's following her, and so she starts to like pick up speed, and instead of like kind of falling back or like taking a minute, he starts to chase her. So now they're like both
guns it. He doesn't even like. Yeah, it's so funny. Yeah, you're right. He is just kind of like, I guess like you have to not lose her. You need to know where she's going, and he's like, well, I guess I'll have to run. I guess I'll have to like run as fast as I can. It's just kind of funny to watch. I wonder if she thinks she's being followed. Pretty funny.
And so she runs up to an apartment building, and he follows her into, like, instead of, he goes right into the building. He calls her up. She goes into the apartment, and he immediately knocks on the door, like without a second's hesitation.
So yeah, what he does is that he follows her to this like shitty apartment, and then he leaves, calls, and says like, okay, here's the address. This is where she lives. Then he goes back to knock on the door to get into her apartment.
And he convinces her that he
needs to inspect the windows. It's like, no.
And so she lets him in, and he's kind of looking around, and we learn that this apartment is this rundown, gross, grimy, no furniture, just like disgusting apartment. I mean, big. There's like a ton of rooms. He's going through the rooms, and she starts pouring wine, and he reads it as, the inspector reads it as she's trying to seduce him, which maybe she is, but it seems more that she's trying to kind of, because she's distracted, because it's very clear that like she understands what's going on. Like she's not that stupid.
No.
She understands what's going on, but he's still kind of playing his thing, and he feels like he's being seduced, because he, like a lot of the characters in the film, just assume that she's just like this big seductress who's just out to have sex with everyone. And even at like one point, I think one of the fights even, right, she calls herself like a horse or whatever.
Yeah, like, oh yeah, I'm having, I'm having sex with everyone while you're gone. You know what I mean? She's just playing it up.
Yeah.
She's not really.
And so he's like, no, 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 and he keeps checking, and she says, don't go into that bathroom or whatever. And of course, like your classic horror movie, he does exactly that.
And he discovers the most disgusting worm monster I've ever seen. I will say, when you're watching it for the first time, of course, all you do is see like a gross, shiny red thing in the corner of this room, and it's dark, and it just kind of like moves slowly, kind of. It's like disgusting and slimy. And yeah, the guy there is just like, whoa, like, what is this? It's just like, this is awful. And then Anna stabs him in the throat with a broken wine bottle. Yeah, so yeah, right away you're basically introduced to like the horror aspect of it, the monster aspect of it. We know very little about it, but it is disgusting. We know that.
Gross and weird and incredible all at the same time. And then we cut to Mark. He's giving his son a bath, right?
Yeah.
And they're like playing in the son does this thing where he likes to deep dive. He has like a little snorkel and he like swims in the water. And Helen comes by and he's like, oh yeah, go dress my son. Which I mean, I guess it probably wasn't weird in Germany. I think it's a little weird, but
I guess he's just like, I have to, because somebody's at the door. It's Heinrich.
yeah.
So it's like, can you do me a favor and my son? Like, okay. And yeah, Heinrich is there, and Heinrich, I think, is high on a drug. Is that what you got?
Yeah.
Because he has like this powder, or like this packet that he kind of has with him around.
Yeah.
I think he must be high on some mysterious drug because he's acting very weird. I think Heinrich is just trying to find out where is Anna, where she is. Yeah, he's doing this weird thing. He's kind of like, whoa, he's kind of like, he's just kind of stumbling around, not really as if he's drunk, because he's talking almost normally. He's just kind of stumbling around as if he's high on some like weird drug. And Mark is just kind of like, I hate you. They basically just kind of have like a pseudo argument or whatever about Anna and stuff. And Anna's trying to find out where she lives. And I don't remember if Mark gives Heinrich the address or not.
No, he doesn't give her the address because he meets with the other inspector.
But yeah, they have kind of this like a little bit of an argument. And I think Heinrich almost tries to do the same thing to Mark, where he tries to go in to see if Anna's there, but Anna isn't there. I think Mark says to him like, I used to be afraid of you, but I'm not afraid of you anymore, or something like that. And they also have like a weird kind of conversation about God and stuff like that. A lot happens in this movie. This isn't one of those movies where it's like you got to watch it a second or third time, because there's a lot of like really good writing in it too that we haven't even mentioned, just because like that would be too much to talk about. But more or less, like, Heinrich's looking for Anna, and Mark is like, I don't like you, go away. And then I think after that, he talks with the investigator again, I think. Oh, well, actually, no. Mark and Helen have sex.
Yes.
She stays there. She spends the night. And she kind of, there's a good scene where she's like cleaning the electric knife.
Yeah.
Remember? She cleans the electric knife. She's like this. And she kind of like says some weird stuff about him, about like being evil or something like that. And Mark's like, okay. And then they have sex. And then they go to school the next day. And then the private investigator finds Mark.
And so he has a conversation with Mark where he's saying, hey, I haven't seen the person I work with, his partner, which it turns out, and this is where I'm getting from this, maybe I'm wrong, but he's like the investigator's
lover. I think so. I think that's what I got. Yeah. So, which is interesting. It's an interesting choice. I think the choice is just to make it more like the stakes are even higher now. It's not just a guy; it's like his lover. So the stakes, and I guess everything is now even more like intense.
So he talks to him, and Mark's like, "Oh yeah, that's kind of weird," but he doesn't seem probably as concerned as he should be, because he seems to be off. Like he's basically in the world of Helen now. Like that's his.
He's almost like completely forgotten about Anna at this point. He's just kind of like whatever, like
which is weird, but yeah. Yeah, he's decided to move on, I guess. And so the investigator goes to the apartment where his partner was last seen. And he goes up there and she lets him in. And it seems like she sort of knows who he is.
Yeah.
Or he says who he is, doesn't he? Because he's like, it's either me or the cops, right?
I don't remember. But yeah, he more or less is just kind of like, what's going on.
Mhm. And he walks through the house, and she's like, "Oh yeah, he's here." And he walks into the bedroom, and that's where you see, I would say, the first like good, like clear look at the creature, which is just,
it's got like earthworms for limbs. His arms look like worms and stuff. And I don't know if you see his face or not, but you know, you see his face, and it's like
there's like this weird close up of his face, and it's like super like, it's so creepy.
it's one of the greatest like things ever. It's so good.
And like the movements feel like so natural. The creature, like, it doesn't feel like a puppet or anything too. It just feels very natural. It's insane. And he sees his lover off in the corner murdered. So of course he's freaked out. So he tries to get away, doesn't, and it kills him. And the monster, like, a creature eats him, or like,
I'm assuming he does something to him. I'm assuming he uses their energy or something like that. I don't think it's like a thing where it's like Anna's job is to lure them there and shoot and kill them.
Yeah, yeah.
And then I think she fucking shoots him.
Oh yeah, he tries to shoot her with his gun. He misses at like point blank range.
Yeah, he something happens, and she gets him.
And then she shoots him with the gun.
Mark goes back to the apartment, and he gets a tape from Heinrich in the mail. It's a video that I think Heinrich took of her doing a ballet class, which we now discover was her job, which I think Mark says, like, you know, she hasn't worked in like a year. So it's like, so, you know, I think Heinrich and her have been at it for about a year, I think is the idea.
Yeah, and she's teaching like a children's ballet class.
Yeah, like little kids.
And she is just the most brutal teacher. And like one of these kids is like struggling to like put their leg up, or like
kind of like the thing where you go like this, you know, just you know, where you put your leg up and your arm up at the same time, which seems difficult. I mean, you know,
seems pretty difficult. And so she grabs this little girl. She's got to be like 10, 11 years old. Grabs this little girl's leg and just pulls. I mean, like pulls. And this kid, even like the kid's performance, is like incredible performance from this kid. And she is just like tears. And you can see like the other kids are just absolutely terrified. And it's just, in a certain sense, to me, this was almost one of the most horrific scenes, just because
it's a child abuse scene.
It is, and
that's awful.
Even though it's like it's not nearly as violent as the other stuff, there's something so awful about it. And these kids are just like terrified, and she is just like pulling on this kid's leg.
She's basically just kind of like, I guess you could say, she's basically forcing her into this position, her body into this position. And kind of making her like stay there for a long time. She's like pull, you know, you know, she's like kind of like doing teaching, I guess, but she's kind of like really making her like just stick in this position, which would hurt after a long time. And then she gets so upset she runs out. Great performance from that person, whoever it is, you know, they did a good job. And she kind of then goes on this long spiel about faith and chance. I think that's when you hear it from her. She's talking about like, oh, faith and chance, you know, she's kind of just talking. I guess she's mostly, the gist of the thing that she's saying is that like there's faith and there's chance, and like I don't know what to make of either one of them. They both kind of contradict me in my life. And I think after that too, I think she comes back to the apartment to see Mark. Actually, I think Mark leaves. Mark comes back to the apartment, and the apartment is trashed by Anna. It's like there's clothes everywhere, and he's just like, what the heck? Like he's not really all that. He's kind of pissed off. He's exasperated, and I think they try to sit down and have a conversation. And she goes on about the faith and chance thing again too. She's acting really weird. She's like kind of like almost like she's high on drugs, but I don't think she is. I think she's just really having a hard time.
And it's like in the middle of the conversation, it cuts to the train station, and
first she's in a church and she's looking at a statue of Jesus,
mm-hmm.
and she has this face, you know. That actress is so good in this movie.
Incredible.
Like, she's so good. We talked about Sam Neill and we talked about Heinrich, but she is just fucking crazy. She's amazing. Just and this next scene where she's in the train station and she basically has a miscarriage, you know, once again is just incredible. It's like a violent, and she's in the subway while he was gone on his work, and she had the miscarriage and it resulted in a nervous breakdown. And you see her nervous breakdown in the subway, and it's just like, it's basically like a dance. It's basically like a choreographed dance. Yeah. She is like thrashing around. She's throwing her groceries around. She's rolling on the floor. Like, it's just the most, like, she whips her head around, which I was watching. I'm like, I'd hurt myself just whipping my head around. Like, and then eventually I think she kneels down, and it's just this amazing effect where like ooze and blood is coming out of her.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so good.
It's so, and it's like, it's not like just like blood either, right? It's like this kind of red
Ooze.
green. It's like so disturbing, and it's all a one shot too, right? When she's in the subway, it's just one long take.
Most
And it's just,
I think it is.
yeah, it's just so intense.
So good.
and just incredible. And then we cut back to them talking, like the end of the conversation, right?
Yeah, and then I think more or less, Heinrich visits Anna's apartment.
Mm-hmm.
He finds body parts in her fridge.
Yeah.
Anna shows up, stabs him, and he runs away. He's bleeding, and then he calls Mark, and he's like, "Please pick me up, Mark." Like,
I love
Mark,
that that's the person he calls.
These are the only people these people know. Like, these people only know one person. But Mark stops by the apartment himself, and he also finds the body parts. Heinrich also sees the creature, but for Mark, the creature's gone. Like, pretty much the whole apartment is clean, except for the body parts in the fridge.
Yeah.
And so he sets Anna's apartment on fire, steals the motorcycle, and then meets up with Heinrich at a bar or something.
Yeah, just down the road. And so he's like looking for Heinrich in the bar, and he like walks around, and he finds Heinrich in the bathroom, or does he take him to the bathroom? They go to the bathroom, and Mark does like this. I guess this must be why he's like espionage, because he like does this thing where he like goes into the bathroom, and right, he like sets all this stuff up. He's like has it all planned out.
He's extremely meticulous, yeah.
And like very well, like clearly someone who's done this before. And he's like, Heinrich, I need your help. And Heinrich's like, I'm the one who just got stabbed. He's like, no, Heinrich, I need your help. So Heinrich, being honestly just like a good person at this point, is like, he goes in to help Mark, and Mark just slams him in the head with like the top piece of the toilet, and then stuffs his head into the toilet and just like drowns him basically.
Makes it look like an accidental death, that he drowned in the toilet somehow. I guess if you're maybe like throwing up in the toilet and you fall asleep and the toilet floods, I guess that would make sense that maybe people have drowned that way. But yeah, he he kills him that way. It's crazy. So yeah, he goes home, and at 2, so he kills Heinrich, and then Margie. By the way, earlier it's established that Margie and like Mark kind of have like a little relationship. So he goes to the apartment. Like, Margie's body is like stabbed up, killed. She dies. He takes the body to inside where Anna's there, and then they have sex on the floor. And then he makes plans to cover Margie's death, and he just carries it outside.
Yeah, he just like carries.
It's so funny how it's like, yeah, we were talking about how meticulous it is, and then he's just like, I'm gonna put like a bleeding body in this bag and then put it in my car.
And he just carries it down. He doesn't even like hide it or anything. He just carries it downstairs. I mean, I guess it's night.
Yeah.
But still, it's like not a lot of. It's not really hiding anything.
Then finally, Mark goes to I think he goes into the apartment, their apartment, and Anna is having sex with the creature. And she's crying, almost. Mark, he's just like dumbfounded. He has no idea what's going on. And I think like, yeah, she's like, like the creature's like, going nuts on her, and it just has these like weird tentacle things. And then I think it cuts like very quickly. I think it cuts. And then like Mark is like talking to Heinrich's mother, where he visits her.
And he goes back to the apartment where she's living, right?
Heinrich's apartment,
yeah.
Yep.
He has a conversation with her, and she pretty much knows that he's dead, doesn't she? Or like,
yeah, I think she calls and asks about it, where his son is, and then by the time Mark arrives at her apartment, she's like, yeah, I guess he's dead. And then there's a very, very sad scene where like Heinrich's mom is like, yeah, that's how it is, and she poisons herself and she dies. And when she dies, it's kind of interesting. The window opens up and like a breeze comes in.
Yeah.
It's that. Very sad. But like I said, people are dying like crazy. And I think the next day is when like his former business partners come out of nowhere asking him to
come back on the project again.
Yeah.
Even though I said no, they're like, come back on again. And he's like, he's still like pushing back, and like investigators go to someone's house, right?
It's Margie's apartment.
It's Margie's apartment.
It's surrounded by cops and his former employers.
And he gets into a taxi, and he tells like a taxi driver to like slam on the gas.
Yeah, just like slam into those cars for me.
Which he does.
Because he's got a gun.
He has a gun. So he does it. They slam the car into the other cars. Of course, the investigators and all the people like come out, and Mark like runs away.
Yeah, there's a shootout, and I think Anna's there, and she gets away too. So Anna's there, I think, gets away. There's a shootout, great shootout. It lasts for 2 seconds, and then he flees on the motorbike. I like the part where he's like driving on the motorbike and he's screaming. He crashes his motorbike, and he goes into a building. He climbs up to this big top of the stairs, and everyone's going after him. Anna's going after him. The police, his business associates, all these people want him. And Anna comes and reveals the creature, who we assume is the Warren monster, is a Mark doppelganger. It is Mark. It just looks like Mark. Like, I think she says something like, he's finished, or it's finished, or something like that.
Yeah.
And then, yeah. It's just like, what the?
It's a very weird left turn. And Mark and his wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, get shot by the people chasing after.
He's about to shoot the doppelganger, and then the police just shoot the heck out of all of them.
Yeah.
Except for the doppelganger.
Except for the doppelganger. The doppelganger lives. Yeah. Goes up the stairs, knocks on the door of this woman, and she like helps him escape basically. And the doppelganger escapes, never to be seen again.
Yeah, Anna and Mark, they die with each other. The doppelganger gets away, and then later we are cut to Helen at the apartment with Bob.
So Bob is eating breakfast because at a certain point, Mark had dropped Bob off before he went to the apartment because he knew it was like he didn't know what was going to. Before he went to check on Heinrich, he dropped Bob off at Helen's, and so it's the next morning. Bob's eating breakfast, and there's a knock at the door. And Bob says, "Don't answer the door. Don't answer the door."
Yeah, that part's so weird.
Yeah, like there's this premonition aspect to it that Bob has, like, and it happens a lot where like these characters kind of seem to know things, and you don't really know why they know them or how they know them. But Bob at this moment seems to like, "Don't answer the door," and she walks towards the door, and you can see the silhouette basically because he's on the other side of this like glass door of Mark, and he's like leaning up against the glass. Like in this weird, almost sexual way, I guess.
Like, let me in, please.
Yeah. And she walks towards the door. And at this point, Bob's like screaming, "Don't let him in, don't let him in, don't let him in." And she gets to the door, and then she turns around.
Well, so first of all, Bob runs upstairs to go into the bathtub.
Yeah, he goes face down into the bathtub, right?
He like as if he's like you said, snorkeling, which is a very interesting response. And yeah, but as soon as Bob goes upstairs and goes into the bathtub, you start hearing the sounds of sirens and planes and explosions too. Yeah, and then she stares, and then the movie ends.
Which is, it's such a strange ending.
The whole movie is strange, dude. Like. We're having a hard time like kind of talking about it just because it's like there's a lot that happens in the movie, both literally and I guess you could say figuratively, I guess, just like there's a lot of like meaning. Like we barely talked about like the East and West Berlin thing, where they're constantly showing scenes of East Berlin, the people over in East Berlin, and like sometimes like it'll be in the background or something. You could argue that West and East Berlin are almost like a couple, you know what I mean, that are kind of arguing with each other or something like that. The doppelganger dynamic too, as well. How kind of like the Mark and Helen at the end, the new Mark and Helen at the end, are like the ideal versions of both couples in a way, almost as if like the monster doesn't maybe even exist, or the doppelganger doesn't even exist. They're almost like, I don't know, figurative things, I guess you could say. Yeah, it's just like so much happens.
It's insane. Every moment is just perplexing beyond description.
Once again, like I said, like it reminded me of Repulsion, reminded me of The Brood, Rosemary's Baby, Exorcist, like you said, All these movies, some came before, some came after, but they all kind of have kind of, thing where it's very, very, I guess you could say emotionally taxing, emotionally exhausting, has a lot to do with like family and marriage and having kids and raising kids and stuff like that. That's very tough to watch.
So out of 10, what would you rate this movie, Andrew?
Man, I gotta do it. I gotta do it one time for Possession. I gotta give it the 10 out of 10. There's nothing like it. Like when I really think about it, like I guess the biggest thing I could say that's wrong with it is that it's sometimes confusing, which is barely a criticism. You can like there are some movies that are so confusing. As long as you watch them enough times, you'll probably get it. So I don't know, just everything about it is just like it has amazing scenes. Just like every scene is great. All the acting is good. Sam Neill, all of them, everybody's good. Crazy, physical, the music in it is very it's not at the forefront, but it is very good. The way that it's shot is very wonderful, very well put together, just fantastic. Just the way that everything is combined looks great. It's just like a very exhausting, powerful movie, and I can't like really see anything too much wrong with it, except that, yeah, watching it for the first time is very confusing. Sometimes like people can be hard to hear, maybe a little bit quiet or hard to understand because people's accents and stuff like that. Yeah, I guess music doesn't play a huge part in the movie, I guess. But that's okay. It's fine. I guess it works well. But yeah, I gotta give it the respect.
I'm gonna give this movie an 8 out of 10. I think it's an incredible film. I think all the performances are great. I think my biggest problem, honestly, with the film really isn't a criticism as much as I find most of the characters to be so unlikable that there were times where like the stakes didn't feel as high to me because like if any of them died, I didn't really care because I like hated them all. Which I mean, I recognize they're not supposed to be likable characters, and I'm not saying they need to be likable characters. But I think for me, that lowered the stakes a little bit. I think technically spectacular. I was a little bothered sometimes by the camera movement because it felt to me a little like and maybe again I've only seen it once, so maybe it's like there are certain things I didn't see. It felt like a little sporadic, not erratic, but sporadic at times. Like I didn't really understand like why the camera would do this or that. But I really enjoyed the film. I mean, enjoyed's kind of the wrong word for a film like this. Like it's not a film you come out.
Yeah, it's really like, yeah, once again, very emotionally taxing, very difficult, very hard to watch. If these kinds of subjects like are tough for you, maybe avoid it, but it's good.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, I'm Andrew Harp.
I'm Austinlugo.
Please follow me at ADHarp24.
Follow me at Austinlugo12.
And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the episode. Please subscribe to us on wherever you get your podcasts, here on Apple Podcast. Leave a review, leave a rating, tell us what you think. And yeah, thank you for listening.